Hello everyone, it's Lindsay and today is Tip Tuesday and I wanted to talk about stencils and some tips for using them in your Bible. I think I've touched on this in prior videos, but I wanted to kind of pull some of those tips out of my videos and make sure they make it into these Tip Tuesdays. That way they're easier to find in the future. I have a video recently showing how I make my own stencils using my Silhouette Cameo. You could use a Cricut cutting machine, so check that out if you want to see how I do that. I like to do that because one, it's inexpensive once you have the machine, and two, I like that these are very thin stencils, and so they kind of form to the page a little bit better and you get better results with a thinner stencil. But using the tricks I'm going to show you today, you can still get good results even with thicker stencils. So I went ahead and just used the back of my journaling Bible just to show you some different mediums that I've used. I've used acrylic paints, I've used distress inks, I've used gelatos. I'm going to pull out some watercolors and show you how to utilize those in your Bible and get good results. But I'm going to work off of a piece of cardstock, that way I can just play around on here. I'm running out of back pages in my Bible, so one that I'm going to start with here is acrylic paint, because this can be a little bit finicky and difficult, and so I have my Bible mat out here and I'm just going to put the teensiest amount of paint, like really hardly any paint at all, on there. And that is kind of the trick to using stencils in your Bible, is using hardly any liquid. If you use too much liquid, that's when you start getting like seepage underneath the stencil. Another little trick is this tool here. So I use cosmetic wedges. These are these little foam wedges, and this is something I used a lot when I was painting signs when I had an Etsy shop, and it works great for using stencils in your Bible. So I just picked these up for a couple bucks at Target and have them in my office all the time. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the paint, and I'm just going to pounce the paint around until I get it evenly distributed on the sponge, but also I want very, very dry. You don't want gloppy paint. And then I can go in over the stencil and apply it. And it's much easier to go in with a light hand and then build up the color than to just go in with tons of paint right from the get-go. And the other nice thing about this is doing it this way is I would still be able to see the text through this stenciling in my Bible, and that's something you kind of lose when you start using acrylic paints in your Bible if you're not careful. If you get too much paint, it covers the text. So by using a sponge and very, very, very small, I mean, I really pounce it until it's almost dry and then go over. And then I could go back in, if I hadn't moved that, I could go back in with more paint and build up those layers of color if I wanted to build up the intensity of that image. So if you're working in your Bible, you may want to washi tape your stencil down, that way it doesn't move. Going in with distress inks, this is a regular distress ink pad, and these do bleed through on your Bible pages, but using it with a stencil seems to be okay as long as you're not too heavy-handed. So I'm just going to get some ink on my sponge, and I'm going to dab it once off just to get any extra ink that might be on that sponge, and then I kind of go in with a twisting motion to apply the color. And this just helps get it into all the little nooks and crannies of whatever stencil you're using, and also kind of gives it a smoother effect than if I was just to stamp down into the paper. I would get kind of an odd effect. And so, you would probably want to mask this off with washi to not get these lines up here, but you can see I get nice impressions with that, again, just with using a little bit of color. I personally like to use Distress Oxide inks in my Bible. This is the same color, Peacock Feathers. This is a pigment and dye ink mixed together, and it just blends a little bit smoother, and I get a little bit smoother of effects in my Bible. This is a fairly new pad, so I don't really have to ink it up too much there. Again, I'll dab it once off just to get any extra off of there, and then I'll go back in with that twisting motion. And this just seems to dry down into a smoother effect. And if I get a harsh line like I did in this one, I don't know if you can see it, I can actually kind of blend that out where I can't do that with regular distress ink. And so it's just a softer effect in your Bible. So either one of those will work. Of course, if I was to get this wet in my Bible, it would bleed through the page. So just heads up there. Gelatos. I know a lot of people in the Bible journaling community are in love with gelatos. They're not really my favorite to use, but I'll show you some tips for using them with stencils. So I know some people kind of want to go in and like color over your stencil with your gelato. That is not going to work. If you can see here, I've got chunky weirdness, and then this is going to transfer over to my other page when I close my Bible. You can't do that. You can't go straight in with the gelato. So I like to work off of a like paper plate or my Bible mat. Now I have found that these colors, the solid colors, are a little bit more dry than the metallic colors, but I just scribble off a pretty good amount off onto my Bible mat, and then I can go in with that sponge again, pick up that color. This does take a lot more pigment than it does with paint or ink, but I can still get stenciling. So then I can go in, and you do kind of have to be aggressive and push down a little bit harder and rub it, but because it's dry, I'm not gonna have to worry about it seeping underneath the stencil like I would with a wet medium. Now if I go in with the metallic, it's much smoother and just easier to work with than the dry one. I'm gonna kind of conserve sponges here, but so I can pick up that color and then go into the stencil that way. One thing, if you follow Tanya Hamilton, she had shared something recently using a heart stencil and kind of an off effect applying gold. And so if I was to go back over one of these hearts I'd already done and just slightly offset it and then go in with my gold gelato over whatever, another gelato, the ink, you know, whatever medium I have, then I can get kind of an offset shadowed look with that metallic gold gelato. So play around with your stencils with the offset and things like that. You can also go in, I'm gonna dump this here. Also go in, let's say you've been using watercolors in whatever the page is that you're doing, and you want to stick with those colors. You don't want to introduce a different type of medium because you like the, you know, whatever colors you're using for your watercolors. You can use these through a stencil, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So typically I would not want to go in with a wet brush and pick up color, and I'll show you here. If I go in with wet color into the stencil, it's going to seep under my stencil and make a mess. So you kind of have some watercolor hearts, but it's not exactly what you want. So I'm going to show you here. If I go in with a baby wipe and pick up color, then I can kind of dab the color through the stencil that way. So I'm going to go in with a different color here. Let's go in with this kind of greenish. So I'm just using my baby wipe to pick up the color, and then I can pounce that in. And again, it doesn't really take very much at all. And then now I can have watercolor stencils. So don't think you can't use watercolors with your stencils. You just have to use it a little bit differently with a baby wipe. And you could do the same thing with the inks, with the paint. You could go in with baby wipe. If you're wanting a little bit more intense color, just know you're gonna get a little bit of feathering because you're introducing a liquid. So typically it's easier to use drier products with your stencils. So I hope that was helpful when you're playing with your stencils in your Bible. I know I didn't show it in my Bible, but it's kind of the same idea. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave those down below. Give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful, and subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. And until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.